Well, I guess I was incorrect on how I ended the video yesterday. Yesterday was November 6th, today is November 7th, and today is the last day that I'll be gone. But I wanted to let you know that today is November 7th. It has been declared by our state legislature that it is Victims of Communism Day. And so the Department of Education is mandating that we spend time today talking about Victims of Communism Day. So what I thought we would do to begin our time together is, what do you know about communism? What have you heard about communism? Is it good, bad? What have you heard about communism? Talk together and with your shoulder partner, and then talk as a class. What do you know about communism? Okay, so welcome back. We have on your screen before you some of the communist revolutions that have taken place through history, and so I'm not going to read them all to you. But what I would like you to do is to take a minute with the person that you're sitting beside, make sure that your devices are out, and have the substitute divide you up into 7 groups, and each group is going to pick one of the 7 revolutions that you see on your screen and find 3 key facts about that revolution, and then somebody in your group will be prepared to share those 3 facts with the class. So 7 groups, each group has a different one of those revolutions. Do a quick Google search, find 3 things that you can share with the class, and then share those together. Well, I hope you learned a few things about those communist revolutions, and those are not all good, right? They're not good at all. So we want to consider the key ideas that come from the foundation of communist ideology. Central to communist ideology is the requirement that all religion be removed. We must not have freedom of religion in a communist society. Karl Marx wrote that communism begins where atheism begins. So communism and atheism have to be tied together, because you cannot have a reliance on a deity in a communist society. You have to have reliance on government. Government is the supreme authority. Government is where all your rights come from. Governments are what we must believe in. And God is the thing that runs against all of that stuff. So Lenin said that all worship of divinity is necrophilia, and that there's nothing more abominable than religion. Someone also said, quote, "Militant atheism is not merely incidental or marginal to communist policy. It is not a side effect, but is the central pivot. Communism needs to control a population devoid of religious and national feeling." So in other words, in order for communism to really begin to take hold, you have to remove national pride, you have to remove national focus, you have to remove things like a pride for a flag, or the national anthem, or things like Independence Day. These things have to be removed, because your reliance has to be on the current government, not a declaration of freedom. You have to remove God from schools. You have to remove God from government. You have to remove reference from God from government. Because if you rely on anything but government, you are not going to end up with a communist state. So you see there then that the societal institutions have to be destroyed. Again, government has to be central. So the family unit has to be destroyed. Marriage has to be undermined, devalued, and destroyed. Education has to be run by the state. It cannot be run by local entities. It can't even be run by state entities. It must be controlled by the federal government. So, it's interesting to me that family, the value of marriage, value of having children, that has to be destroyed philosophically for communism to succeed. Marriage has to be devalued and ultimately destroyed for communism to succeed. Now, you might find that peculiar, but part of the reason why we find that peculiar is because there is a move toward dependency on government instead of dependency on individuals and freedom in our country today. It's one of the reasons why the Florida legislature and the Department of Education has said we have to start talking about this. And so when it says that education must be controlled by the state, they're not talking about Florida, they're talking about the federal government. and the bureaucracy Department of Education in the executive branch. So moving on, Karl Marx declared that there's a 10-point path to communism. And when we get to the end of this, I'd like you to have a conversation, press the pause button, and have a conversation. Which of these, if any, do we currently see in America today? Number one, surrender of private property to public purpose. Number two, a heavying progressive or not a heaving, that's a typo. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. A heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Number three, get rid of inheritance. In other words, I can't give anything of what I own to any family member. When I die, the government gets everything. So no more inheritance. Number four, the confiscation of the property of immigrants and the confiscation of property of anyone who disagrees with the government's purposes. So if you don't fall in line, if you don't agree with what the government says, the government is going to tell you what you have to do, up to and including they're going to take your job and your property. 5, centralized credit within the government by means of a national bank run by states as a monopoly. So a centralized bank run as a federal entity that ultimately then controls the policies of all banks. Number 6, centralize the means of communication and regulate it by the federal government. So the federal government gets to tell us what we can say, what's accepted speech, and it's interesting because it goes from what is legal speech, what's accepted speech, and then ultimately what's compelled speech. So first they tell you what you shouldn't say, and then they tell you what you have to say. Have we experienced any of that in the last few years? Number 7, factories and the factors of production are owned by the federal government. So in a mixed economy, since this is government, you've not had this in economics yet, but in a free economy, the government has no influence. In a socialist economy, you and I would own the factors of production, but the government owns the businesses. In communism, the government owns both the factors of production and the businesses. So what's factors of production? The factors of production is all land, labor, capital. Currently, we own the land, the labor, the capital, and businesses, quote unquote, buy our labor, the factor of production, in order to produce goods. So if you work at 5.5, R&R, wherever it is you work, that business owner buys your labor. You own the labor. The business buys that labor from you in order to make goods and services. But in a communist government, the government owns you, and they tell you where you're going to work to produce goods that are going to be shared with everyone, and you don't make any personal money out of that. So you don't get to buy shoes because you went to work and made money to buy shoes. You end up at the back of a truck that shows up in your neighborhood, and if they happen to have shoes, then you're going to get shoes that day, whatever it is that the government tells you you quote unquote deserve. So in a communist government, they not only influence it, they not only own the businesses, they own you, and they're going to tell you what it is that you have to do. Number 8, equal liability of all to work. That means you don't have a right not to work. Everyone's going to work in whatever job the government gives you. Number 9, equally distribute the population. You can't have population hubs. Population hubs do exist in communist governments, but they create difficulty for the creation of goods and services that are needed across the communist entity. So, in other words, if you have a limited number of farmers, you have a limited number of food. And if most people live in the city, then you don't have people farming to make food for the people in the cities. So communism needs to spread people out, and urban centers are discouraged. Lastly, free education for all children in schools run by the federal government. Now, yes, we have free education, but you pay for it through your tax dollars. So everyone that owns property in Nassau County pays a tax that runs the school. So whereas you as a student do not pay, if your family owns property, you are paying for your education. If you're renting property, a part of the money that you're giving the owner of that property is being used to pay for your education. So you're not paying it directly, you're paying it indirectly. But regardless, you're paying for it. In communist societies, it is free and the government pays for that education. So consider those 10 things. Where are we as a nation? And what do you think about those 10 and where we are as a nation? Talk about that for a few minutes. I so wish I was there. I hope you had a great conversation together. So here are some key things to consider in communism. First, your rights do not come from God. In our Constitution, we say we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The government in America does not give you your rights. The government in America does not assure you of your rights. The government recognizes the rights you already have by the Creator. Now, whether or not you are a theist or not, or if you're an atheist or not, doesn't matter. As a nation, we believe that we are endowed by our Creator with rights. This is central to who we are as Americans. If the government can give us our rights, the government can take those rights away. America has decided to say that the government did not give us these rights, so the government cannot take those rights away. In communism, the government gives them to you, the government can take them away. 2, destroy God. If the Creator has not given you your rights, then the government gets to decide what you have a right and not have a right to do. So you have to destroy God. 3rd, protect the ruling elite at all costs, along with the systems that keep them in power. Are we seeing any of that today? Protect the ruling elite and all power systems that keep them in power. 4, people are incapable of managing their rights, therefore they don't deserve any. This is a danger that we have in concluding that people are incapable or are not smart or that they don't matter. We believe in the foundational belief that people have the right to manage their lives, even if that is a dangerous proposition. Any other belief is going to result in the belief that the government has to be responsible for us. That's why, my friends, we have pizza boxes that say, don't eat the box. It's why we have hair dryers that say, yeah, you might not want to use this in the bathtub. It's a journey toward the idea that the government, exists to protect us. The government does not exist to protect us. The government is here to recognize that we have been endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the role of government. So the government believes that we are capable of having rights, and the government exists to protect those rights that have been given to us by God. But then lastly, the government makes no mistakes in communist societies. They are all ruling, all powerful, and make no mistakes. So here are some patterns in all communist regimes. The loss of basic rights, loss of freedom of speech, censorship, compelled speech. In other words, you must say that these things are true, and if you don't, you might get, what might be a word for it? Canceled? I wasn't looking for the word. The whole idea of being canceled to compel speech is dangerous. In America, we believe that people should have the right to say anything, even if it's dumb. And we as the American people get to decide what speech is going to be celebrated and what speech is going to not be celebrated. And so if something is said in my class, you have the freedom to say it, but I also have a responsibility to create a space that's safe for people to learn. So in our world, speech needs to be protected, speech needs to be celebrated, but speech also can be moderated not by government policies, but by the will of the population as a whole. Next, loss of income, loss of employment, loss of your home, mandated movement. In other words, you have to move somewhere. So in that sense, you're going to lose family and friends. Forced employment. You don't get to decide what you're going to do. You don't get to decide if you're going to college. You don't get to decide if you're going into the workforce after high school graduation, if you graduate at all. So forced employment means that you're going to work in whatever job the federal government says you're going to work. And then lastly, abuse, murder, and mass murder. We're seeing this around the world. We're seeing this in China with the forced imprisonment of the Uyghur population. If you talk to individuals in China, they will tell you that they are re-education camps, when the reality is they're concentration camps designed to engage in forced labor that ultimately result in mass murder. These communist ideas all drift toward the idea that there are people in our culture that do not matter, and because they do not matter, they do not deserve life or freedom. So the reason we're talking about this today is ultimately so that we do not go down a path toward socialism and then ultimately communism. Again, you're going to learn more about that in economics, the journey from free market to mixed economies to socialism to communism. But even without having that information, you can see places in American culture that drift us toward those socialist and then ultimately communist ideas. Lastly, Hannah Arendt, in her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, says this: the ideal subject of totalitarian rule isn't the convinced Nazi or communist, but the people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction and the distinction between true and false no longer exist. I'd like you to end today. This is the last slide for the day, but I'd like you to end today. In what ways is that slide true? In what ways is that quote wrong? Is there anything that you would add that an individual becomes a prime target for socialism and communism if fill in the blank was true? So is this statement true? Is it not true? What things would you add that would be an ideal subject for communism? I tell you, I wish I was there to hear this conversation today, but the state of Florida mandated that it be done on November 7th, so here we are. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow, and I look forward to hearing what you guys talked about today. Hey, you matter, and we'll see you tomorrow.